Do you typically spend more time planning your lessons than teaching them? Annoying, right? My name's Owen, and I describe myself as a reformed former overplanner. I used to think that every lesson needed to have a bulky PowerPoint and a ton of different worksheets tailored to all the different ability kids in my lessons. I thought if I didn't provide these things, my kids would suss me out as an imposter who was faking it until he made it. So did these resource-heavy lessons result in some great teaching? Nope. I found that these lessons were pretty hit and miss. And now I kind of know why. I was spending more time managing the handouts and the resources than actually giving the kids the attention they needed and tapping into the learning or lack of learning that was taking place in the lesson. And of course, it led to huge burnout on my part. I remember the stress I used to feel on the way to work, knowing that I had to print out half a rainforest before my 9 o'clock lesson. And I used to almost get into royal rumbles at the printer with colleagues. There was this one old lady in particular who used to make these enormous booklets for every class. And we would actually get into fights over who made it to the printer first. If this sounds like you, I want you to know today that it is okay to go into your lesson with not many resources and to avoid overplanning. I've now found myself in higher responsibility teaching positions where all this planning time has disappeared. Sometimes I literally have 5 minutes to plan a lesson, and on other occasions I have to go and sub for a colleague at last minute and I'm thrown into the classroom and have to wing it. A weird thing has happened. I've actually found that in these lessons where I'm having to think on my feet a bit more, the kids seem a lot more engaged. And actually, I've noticed that they seem to be learning more too. Because rather than focusing on all the handouts, I'm actually tapping into the learning that's taking place. Now, I've developed a system which allows me to plan almost every lesson in under 10 minutes. And to do this, I make sure that I have 3 resources with me at all times in my classroom. Well, this is not about killing time and coming up with time filler activities. These resources allow me to teach any learning point meaningfully and result in lessons where the children are usually pretty engaged. So now I'm going to talk you through what these 3 things are that I always have in my teacher toolbox. So the first thing that I always have in my classroom, and I make sure that each of my students has one of these, is, drum roll, a mini whiteboard. Super simple, but I think these things are cutting edge technology. And there are 3 reasons why you should bring them to all of your lessons. Firstly, they are fun and versatile. Any activity which could have been a worksheet can very easily be done on a mini whiteboard instead. When I teach my kids new vocabulary, after I presented the vocabulary, I want to check that they know how to spell the words. So I'll dictate the words and ask the kids to spell them out on the whiteboard. Then I want to check if they understand the meaning of the word. So I'll choose a word, I'll describe it. The kids have to think about it, write the corresponding word on the whiteboard. Maybe then I want to promote a bit of creativity. So I'll say one of the words, put the kids into groups, and then get them to have a little competition. Who can write the word in the most creative sentence? So they do that in groups and then hold up their sentence on the whiteboard. I think the list of activities that you can do is endless. And the weird thing is that an activity that the kids would think of as boring on a worksheet becomes super fun and engaging when they're using a whiteboard and the oversized pen, and they get to compete with their classmates to do the task. And that brings me on to the second reason why you should bring them. I think they facilitate participation and group collaboration very well. Do you find that you ask kids to discuss something in pairs or in groups and only like half the kids do it and the rest are like zombies? Well, add in this extra step. After the kids have discussed the topic, then they have to write down what they said, write down a summary on the whiteboards. I find that way more of them do it as a result. And it also teaches them responsibility because they know they'll have to be accountable and share their work at the end. They know that they will have to share the whiteboard and the pen and the tissues. And they know that they will have to use their whiteboard properly and correctly, as I will take them away if they do misuse their whiteboards. The third advantage is that it allows you to assess all learners. Don't you hate it when you pose a question to the class and the same 3 hands always shoot up? Well, if you're allowing those kids to answer all of your questions, you're basically gathering data on whether your pupils understand something from 3 of them. Try this instead. Ban the kids from raising their hands and pose a question to them. Instead of orally conveying their answers, they need to write their answers. So every child needs to write their answer on their board and then hold it up. I find that the response rates are much higher and the quieter kids feel much more comfortable writing their answer down on the whiteboard, especially when they can discreetly hold it up in a way that only the teacher can see it, if you've arranged your classroom a certain way. So mini whiteboards are fantastic, but one disclaimer is the pens dry up very fast. So my school didn't provide me with whiteboards. I decided to buy them online, and I think it was a really worthwhile investment because of the return they brought. But I found that the pens that I was provided with just dried up after about a week, and they weren't refillable. So a lot of activities bombed when I found that half the kids had dry pens. So if you are going to do something in the staff room before your lesson, it's make sure you've accumulated a ton of pens and that you're on top of filling them up with ink. Otherwise, you find your whole lessons will totally bomb if they're so whiteboard dependent. The second thing that I always have in my classroom is a plastic folder full of these little cut up pieces of paper. Again, very simple, but I think they're cutting edge. Similarly to mini whiteboards, I think they are very versatile. I'm going to continue to use a vocabulary lesson as an example because I think we teach new vocabulary in all subjects, but these could be adapted to any learning point. So imagine now I've taught my 10 new words to the class. We've done a few quick activities on the mini whiteboards to practice meaning and spelling. Now I really want these new words to stick in the students' memory. So I'll give them a set of cards and then they can go and make their own flashcards. So on one side of each card, they write the word. And then on the other side, they could write it in a sentence, so they could draw a picture. You could make it as age appropriate as you like. I think there are advantages to this, and I'm not being lazy getting students to make their own flashcards because they're engaging very deeply with the meaning and the form of that word, especially if they've got to come up with some picture depiction of the meaning. After the students have made their own flashcards, then they can go and play some engaging student-centered games to get them even more familiar with these words. So for example, you could put the students in groups. One student has a card stuck to their head and their classmates describe the meaning of that word and they have to guess. Or maybe you lay the cards out on each group's table and they do a memory game or a Pellmanism kind of game where they have to match words to descriptions, for example. Again, you can be as creative as you want with this, as the possibilities are pretty vast for what you can do. So while I think the whiteboards and the cut up pieces of paper are really great in getting students to practice what you've taught them in hands-on, meaningful ways, there is one disadvantage in comparison with the traditional worksheet. And that is all that beautiful work that they've done on the whiteboard is erased and gone in seconds. And very likely you'll find that the cards that they made get lost or tossed in the bin. So there's nothing to show to mum at the end of the day, and there's no record of what the students have learned, which makes it more difficult for them to go and review work. So here's where my third resource that I always have in the classroom comes in. And this is notebooks. Make sure each student has their own notebook. If your school already provides your kids with these, then great. But ask yourself the question, are you utilizing them enough, or are you relying more on the traditional handout? If your school doesn't provide them, then set this up at the beginning of term. Be very strict in making sure that all your students invest in a notebook and they bring it to every lesson. Again, I think the beauty of these are that they are versatile, but they also provide a record of everything that the kids have done in class in one place. When you have a handout, it's a little bit rigid, isn't it? What if you've got a handout and you find that actually it's not that relevant to the needs of most of the students in your class? Maybe it's too easy, maybe it's too difficult. That's where these things come in handy. They give you the freedom to think of a new activity on the spot that best responds to the needs that have emerged in your lesson. So for example, with me, after the kids have done some practice of new vocabulary I've taught them, I'll then get them to focus a bit more on the tricky words that they're struggling with. So maybe I'll write the tricky words on the board in the class, and then I'll get the students to write them out in their notebooks, and then they'll have to think of their own sentence to write them in. Another activity that I really like doing in the notebooks to consolidate learning is to get the students to put all of the new words that they learned in today's lesson into a story. Again, these are great in the fact that they are both versatile and you have a record of everything that they've done in class. So those were my three things. And I hope they've made you realize that actually you can do a lot in your lessons with very little, and that we can be using the resources that we have at our fingertips to do some quite meaningful teaching rather than going to all this work to achieve the same thing. Now, I am going to put a little caveat on this video and say that I don't teach all of my lessons in the way I just described. In certain situations, if I've got a certain thing that I need to teach, I do think it is a good idea to make some kind of supplementary handout or activity, and my kids have responded very well to these. But just remember, context is king, yeah? Think about the lesson aim that you have to achieve and whether making something supplementary is actually useful to achieving that aim or a waste of time. Now, to say thank you for making it to the end of this video, I've actually got a fourth bonus thing that I always use in my lessons. And this one is a little bit higher tech. Before I share my final tip with you, I just want to say my heartfelt thanks for sticking around this long. This was my first YouTube video, and I hope it's the first of many on this channel. I'm the introspective teacher. I like to reflect on and constantly improve my teaching practice, learning from mistakes that I've made in the past and sometimes continue to make today. I hope this channel will be useful to you because I plan to share some of the things that I've learned on my teaching journey and also some evidence-based things that I've read about teaching. So if that sounds good to you, please support the channel by hitting the like and subscribe. I think it's a bell or a button. I don't know. I feel about 100 years old now, but you know what to do. So I think the one downside to using notebooks is that there's just not enough time to share the students' work with their classmates. Some students will write something really creative in their notebooks, but obviously we don't have time to go through all of their work and share it with the class. So this is where this website comes in handy. So recently I've started replacing some of the activities that we do in the notebooks with Padlets. So I use this website, padlet.com. Basically, let me show you an example of some schoolwork we did recently. So my kids had just done a reading about this boy Oscar's school in their English as a foreign language class. So then I wanted them to think a bit more deeply about the text. So I asked them, would you like to go to Oscar's school? Give 2 reasons from the text and your own reason. Now, I was going to get them to write this in their books, but I knew that they would produce richer answers if they could share them with their classmates. So all you have to do is set up your question on Padlet, then press share. So I typed it, let me show you. I typed the question, and then if you press this, you give students the QR code, and then if they have phones or iPads, they log into the Padlet and then they answer the question. This is a great way of increasing the amount of acknowledgement you give to student contributions and the amount of sharing that they can do of their ideas. What I like too is that you can also get students to give each other feedback on their work. So for example, this student has spelled modern incorrectly. I could involve the other students in getting them to correct this, couldn't I? It's also a great way of getting students to bounce ideas off each other. So we could look at one of the answers, and then I could ask, number 1, do you agree with number 10's answer? And again, this could be used to stimulate quite a lengthy classroom discussion, or maybe quite a lengthy focus on the different errors that the students have made, which could then inspire some more activities. So this video isn't sponsored by Padlet. I think I'm running before I can walk here, but if they are interested in sponsoring this video, please feel free to DM me.